Daily Mail front page here. EU vote, Cameron's extraordinary intervention. PM warns of war and genocide. War and genocide? Really? If we pull out of Europe?
No, well, I don't write the Daily Mail headlines, and, you know, God help me if I ever do. What the Prime Minister...
Well, I can imagine they might feel the same way, Foreign Secretary.
What the Prime Minister is saying in the speech today is that we shouldn't take the peace and security and stability that we've come to enjoy in Europe for granted. We should remember that it's only 20 years ago that we were seeing war in the Balkans, massacre in Srebrenica, and remember that even today, Europe, in the widest sense of Europe, is challenged by aggressive action by Russia, and it's the ability of the European Union to work together in applying sanctions to Russia that has been able to stop that aggression in the Ukraine.
OK, but we were speaking to Gisela Stewart, who originally, you know, born in Germany, from Munich, came over here, calls herself British now and is an MP, who says, look, this is all the job of NATO. It doesn't matter about the EU. You know, she wants to leave the EU and says our defence is safe because we are part of an organisation where that is its primary role.
Well, NATO is responsible for our outward-facing defence, defending the NATO countries about attacks from outside. Of course, NATO was originally established to provide a bulwark against the Soviet Union, and is now increasingly looking at the threats that we face from Islamist extremism to our south. But the Prime Minister's point today is about the tensions within the European continent, and he will point out that over hundreds and hundreds of years, whenever Britain has turned its back on Europe, whenever Britain has retreated into isolationism, we have always regretted it. We've always been forced to go back and re-engage in Europe, because what happens in Europe matters to Britain's security. And time after time, we have had to reinsert ourselves into Europe in order to protect ourselves and our own interest. And he's arguing that it is more sensible for Britain to remain engaged, that we need to take an active part as a European power in what is happening in Europe, because it matters to us.
One of the biggest pressures at the moment on the EU is actually not a war in Europe or on the continent, but a war outside, the civil war in Syria, and the amount of refugees that is creating, and the immigration problem that is raising for EU countries, and the tensions that inevitably creates. And of course those who want to get out of the EU say, well, if we had more control over our borders, then we could deal with those tensions more effectively.
No, we have control over our borders. We're not part of the Schengen area, so people can't just come into Britain. We have strong border controls. But look, what those Leave campaigners are essentially saying is, let's turn our back on this problem. Let's pretend we can isolate ourselves from the big challenges in the world. And the challenges of large-scale migration are one of the big problems we face in this world. It's not just Syria, but migrants coming from all sorts of countries across the poorer parts of the world towards the richer parts of the world. Well, that's a big challenge, and we've got to address it, and we're better off addressing it together, working together. Even though Britain is not directly exposed to the refugee flow from Syria because we're not in the Schengen area, we judge that it's still in our interest to work with our European partners in trying to find a long-term, sustainable solution that prevents these large destabilising flows of refugees. That's got to be in Britain's interest.
OK, let me throw this at you. This is from the Prime Minister's speech, OK? He says, can we be sure, so sure, that peace and stability on our continent are assured beyond any shadow of doubt? Is that a risk worth taking? I would never be so rash as to make that assumption. It's barely been 20 years since war in the Balkans and genocide in Srebrenica. I mean, the Daily Mail headline's absolutely spot on in reflecting what the Prime Minister is about to say in a few minutes' time. And I simply say to you guys that it's all very well terrifying us with threats of impending war and genocide. We can't rule this out if you dare to vote out. But can you give us any reassurances now that if we stay in, there won't be any war or genocide? What's the difference?
What the speech is pointing out is the contribution that the European Union has made, and it's not alone. It's, of course, alongside institutions like NATO, the UN Security Council, but the contribution that the European Union has made to peace and stability in this continent. And the Prime Minister is pointing out that not all of Europe is as stable as the UK is. Not all of Europe has the long tradition of democracy and resolving our disputes peacefully as Britain and its immediate neighbours have. This is a big continent, and its security overall matters to Britain. It matters to us for our prosperity, and it matters to us for our security, because we know that if parts of the continent are suffering insecurity and instability, from those parts will come people who seek to do us harm.